Thank you so much for being here today. We're so excited to speak with you. As I was sharing, I don't think we get a lot of leaders, unfortunately, that are both in arts and business. So excited. And I know, Diana, you're also a CBS alum, so welcome back to campus. And I was really impressed that not only when you were doing your CBS studies, and I'm pretty sure grades counted back then, they don't anymore, you also worked not only at St. Vincent's Hospital in Brooklyn, but you also worked at Smith Barney in the public finance department. So just curious, how did that come about, and why did you decide to pursue all those things, and how did you balance that with your studies?
Well, I was actually in the joint degree program between business and public health, which was the St. Vincent's connection. But in all honesty, I told my father and my mother that I was applying to business school, and my father, this was a very long time ago before any of you were even born. So my father basically said, what do you want to go to business school for? You're just going to go and get married and have kids, and you're not going to have a career, so why do you want to do it? And it was the one really big fight I ever had with my father. I said, how dare you? Of course I'm going to have a career, and I'm going to business school, and what do you care, because I'm paying for it. So I ended up paying for it. So I took out loans, and I had to have a couple of jobs to help me live while I was in business school. So that was basically why I got jobs. But it turned out really well, because there was a guy who was in the program a year ahead of me who also had these two jobs, and he sort of bequeathed them to me. And it worked really well, because the St. Vincent's job was actually working in the hospital as an evening and weekend administrator, which is a whole different issue. It was a very bad section of Brooklyn at the time, and I was taking the subway back and forth from Red Hook. The city was not quite as safe back then as it is now. But that was sort of the medical part of it, and what it's like to be an administrator in a hospital, in a healthcare institution. And then Smith Barney was obviously the finance part of it. So I worked in the healthcare finance department at Smith Barney. So we were actually financing hospitals and medical institutions and that sort of thing. So it was a good mix, and it allowed me to earn enough money so that I could actually eat and live while I was going to business school.
Wow, sounds like quite a packed schedule, and that's amazing that you said that you were going to chart a path for yourself that was above just being a homemaker at the time. And I know you also...
Actually, I have to say, my father has since come around.
Oh, love that.
He's still alive, and he's very proud of me.
Oh, that's nice. We'll varnish his reputation a little bit there. But I know afterwards you worked in IB for a while, and you also worked in politics. And sounds like you always had a strong sense of yourself as a woman in these male-dominated spaces. But I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about those dynamics and how you navigated them.
So my first job out of business school, I went to work full-time for Smith Barney. I had two offers, one from what was then Solomon Brothers to work on the trading floor, and the other one was in investment banking for Smith Barney. And the trading floor at Solomon Brothers was actually not what I really wanted to do. It was a very male-dominated and very bro culture at that point. And it was the same at Smith Barney, but I spent a little bit of time on the trading floor at Smith Barney, but it was mostly in banking. And I would go down to the trading floor and be treated like most of the women. You get your butt pinched, and people would make comments and things. And you just have to stand up for yourself and not let it faze you, but give as good as you get. So actually, the trader who pitched my butt became a good friend years later.
Wow.
When we were all doing different things, and he actually did apologize.
That's amazing.
So it was interesting. But so being one of the only women in the industry at that point was actually an advantage, because if you're sitting in a meeting and you're the only woman in the room, people tend to remember you. And you're not dressed exactly the same way as everybody else in a tie and jacket, which everybody wore back then, was tie and suit and jacket. So people remembered who you were, and they would actually do things for you that they wouldn't do for a man, like take your phone call and actually take a meeting. So there were advantages that went with it also. So it wasn't all bad. And I had a really good time. It was a great career. I actually worked at 3 investment banking firms, none of which is still in existence, hopefully not due to me. Smith Barney, which is now part of Citi, on whose board I sit. Lehman Brothers, which famously went out of business in the 2008 crash, and DLJ, which got subsumed into a bunch of other banks. And then a guy and I went off and we started our own firm. We had a parting of ways about 4 years later. Actually, starting your own firm is really great. It's so much fun. But you work your tail off, and there's always more that you can do. So you have to be prepared for really, really working hard. Anyway, so we started this firm, which is still in existence today. And we had a parting of the ways around some policy issues and things, and I decided I needed to go and do something else. And Governor Pataki, who was a Republican governor in the state of New York, had just gotten into office, and I really liked what he was doing because he was a Republican, I was a Republican, he was environmentally friendly, he was socially liberal and financially conservative, which is how I define the Republican Party, which actually doesn't fill that definition anymore, unfortunately. I'm now a Democrat. Anyway, so I went to work for Governor Pataki, and I worked for him for about 10 years. And so now I've had experience in the corporate world, investment banking, the government world, and the not-for-profit world through sitting on boards. And there are a lot of similarities and differences between them. But the one thing that really came through to me is that in all 3 of them, people are really dedicated to what they do. They work really, really hard, and they really care. Mm. And the management of people in all 3 of those situations is the same thing. You're dealing with people. You need to motivate them and get them to do what you want them to do.
Mm. Thank you. Very long and inspiring career, and sounds like you were able to turn some challenging situations kind of on their head and make the best out of them. So,
well, I play golf, and the big thing about golf is when you get yourself into a bad situation, you have only yourself to blame, and how you play golf and how you score is actually more about how you get out of bad situations than how you hit a good shot every time. So experience is built up over life, getting out of bad situations and figuring it out.
What a lovely metaphor, thank you. And really quickly before I put Kathy in the hot seat, I know you mentioned that you were straddling your public health and business degree. So did you carry on with your public health enterprises at all, or did that kind of feed through your career?
Yeah, well, so when I went to work for Smith Barney, I had a choice. I could either complete my public health degree, which meant doing an internship and writing a thesis, or I could go make money with Smith Barney. So I went to Smith Barney, and about 15 years later, the then dean of the School of Public Health found me, and he was finding all the people who never actually graduated and said, okay, you're going to graduate from this. So I said, okay, fine. So I went to school up there on weekends, basically. I had a professor who was a coach, and so I took a bunch of the courses and wrote a paper, and I got my degree. And I sit on the board of overseers for the School of Public Health.
Wow.
But I've never worked in a public health institution. Unfortunately, it's one of my regrets, actually, but life has worked out okay.
Yeah. Well,
Still time.
Yeah.
Still time.
And I'm sensing a trend of you putting in extra work on the weekends while other people are maybe off doing fun things. So it's pretty amazing. All right, Kathy. So I know that you, majored in music. You were very into the arts, and then ended up in radio eventually. So curious if you could tell us about how you started in radio and how you then transitioned over to ballet at New York City Ballet.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I studied music, and I really had decided I did not want to be a performer. I did not want a performing career. It just didn't feel like...
Kathy is a beautiful singer.
Oh, so kind, so kind. But yeah, so I wasn't really sure, what was next. Would I go to graduate school, whatever? I had a job in between my junior and senior year at the Treasury Department, of all things. I lived in Washington, D.C., or in that area. I grew up there. And the government at the time hired college kids for the summer to do, sort of grunt work, right? So through a connection, I got a job at the Treasury Department. It was a department that was tracking, international investments. I mean, I literally knew nothing about it, but it was, just an interesting summer job. Through that, the man who ran the department had a daughter who is an actress and was working at the National Endowment for the Arts. And I got to know her and became friends with her. And she said, you ought to think about the National Endowment for the Arts. I don't know if you all know what that is. It's the federal agency that gives grants to, at least up till now, it has given grants to artistic organizations around the country. So I applied for a job there, and I got a job, and I just never looked back. It was this idea of who actually makes all the art things happen. I just never really thought about it. But it turned out to be just the right combination for me of having the interest and something of the training, and then combining it with what I ended up really discovering. I really liked management and administration. So that's how I started. I was at the NEA for about 10 years, and then I came to New York actually first to work at the New York City Ballet in fundraising, which I really never thought, having been on the other side of the desk and watched these poor people come and ask for money, I never thought that I would be one of those people with my little tin cup. But I came to New York and had a fantastic experience for 5 years working at the ballet and learning all about fundraising, which turns out to be way more about strategy and planning and relationships and all sorts of things, which I sort of thought it was about, picking up the phone and making a cold call. So that was a great experience. I then went to just a bigger development job at the New York Public Library, the system here, and worked on a capital campaign and some other things. Then went to what was then a startup out of Lincoln Center called Jazz at Lincoln Center. It just had begun, it was 9 months old. And within months getting there, we had the opportunity to build a home for ourselves in what was then called the Time Warner Center, Columbus Circle, which was just kind of came out of the blue. I mean, we went for it, never really thinking we would get the opportunity, and we did. And we had no business actually doing that because we were so young. But Wynton Marsalis was the artistic and is still the artistic director. He is among the most charismatic people you will ever meet, and so his passion and the fundraising that we were able to do, we built and opened that facility, which was just a fabulous experience. And then I went to radio, which was also a fantastic experience. We were also building a new facility with new studios, a new home for WNYC, and we were also in the process of we bought WQXR, the classical radio station. Oops, sorry. While I was there, which was also a really, really great experience. And I'd only been there a short period of time when I got a call from the man who was then the artistic director at the ballet and said, we're changing our structure, we're creating this new position, which would be in tandem with him. And we'd kind of kept up over the years and talked about working together over the years, but it hadn't really been the right time. And he said, I think this really might be the right time. And I'm just, oh gosh, I wish you hadn't asked, because I really had such a hard time thinking about leaving this WNYC that I loved and where they'd really, created a job for me there. And I was really on a path. But anyway, a long story short, I decided to accept the job, and I couldn't be happier that I did. It was the right decision, and it's been a fabulous run. And that was like 15 years ago now. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Time flies.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. And before I concentrate a little bit more on the New York City Ballet and what you both have been doing there, I'm curious if you could walk us back to your long career in fundraising as well. Reason being is I think a lot of students here are thinking about ways that they're going to be making sales either as a partner in a consulting firm or as a hedge fund manager or things like that. So I know you've mentioned that you find it really about building relationships and matching needs and interests, but Wondering if you could expound upon that a little bit more and maybe provide some tips for our students.
Yeah, I don't know about the tips part, but yeah, I think fundraising is really, it can be, I think it has a bad rap. Everybody thinks, oh, I don't want to ask anybody for money. And that's part of it. Of course, you are asking somebody for money, but it's also so much about relationships. And I think in the case of our organization and many nonprofits, people giving to these organizations, it's one of the most important things that they do in their life. They feel so strongly about this organization that they're actually going to give some of their own money. And to be part of that, dynamic and part of that experience that is really one of the most joyous things in someone's life is really a privilege. And it's actually the really fun part about fundraising, I think. And just, the relationship building and the opportunity that you have to meet so many people that you would never otherwise meet, in all sorts of different walks of life and different times of their life and different professions, all of that. It's really fascinating. And then the strategic part is also really interesting. I mean, we talk all the time internally about, planning and thinking about, how to attract more donors and making those matches between, what somebody's interested in and what we need, all the time. It's really interesting. And there's no real one size fits all. That's what's interesting about it too.
Wow, you're kind of selling me on fundraising. It sounds like get to meet a lot of cool people, get to think critically. So, wow, never thought I would be attracted to that career, but thank you.
Oh, well, I think the thing is, it's interesting about fundraising, particularly in the nonprofit world, is that it's one of the places where there's actually a career path. Mm-hmm. A lot of the other things that are done in these organizations that aren't necessarily leading to the next thing. They might be, but not always. But fundraising, every organization needs it, every single one. And so there's just so much opportunity there.
And speaking of defined career paths, as you mentioned, you came into a completely new role that had never been done before. So how did you go about defining that and figuring out what your day-to-day should look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was fortunate to have a partner in this, the former artistic director who was, it used to be that everybody reported into him. And so he was sort of over all the, not only the artistic side, but the business side. He was so ready to give up all of that, that, it wasn't hard to kind of carve out the areas that were really, needed to be looked over, that were management related, the finance, the marketing, the PR, the fundraising, all of those things.
The building,
yes. We also run and operate our theater. So it wasn't really, it was not as hard to kind of carve out, what those areas were. And then, and I think also for me, because I had been there before, I had already a lot of relationships on the board and in the, on the staff of people who were still there when I had been there before. That made it a lot easier too, rather than just coming in as a stranger, into that environment where you really have to kind of, relationships are really important just to get things done. So that helped too.
Great, thank you. And I know one reason why you were hired is because, with the downturn of COVID, of course, and just the future of the arts, it's transitioning. I think 10 years ago when I looked out into like an opera or ballet audience, it was all white hair that I saw and no other colors. So I'd love to kind of hear about what is your vision for both of you for the New York City Ballet and for the arts in general as you move forward, and how are you thinking about revitalizing a younger audience and bringing them through the doors?
Well, it's not revitalizing, it's building.
Yeah, building it, yeah.
From scratch.
No, for sure. We've been, obviously, audiences have been getting older in a lot of the performing arts, and we've been working for the past decade on really trying to broaden the demographic in our audience in a lot of ways. And one area that we've been working on really hard is the younger demographic. And we've had a number of different strategies. I think Diana and I could probably talk about this part of the work for a whole bunch of hours, but just to try to summarize it, we started out and we just completely restructured the way we sell our tickets. So we had a company come in and help us analyze ticket sales over a 10-year period. and we could start to see patterns. And one pattern that we saw is that when we didn't sell out in exactly the same areas. So it was this horseshoe around the back and the sides of the orchestra. So we said, look, if that's not really selling most of the time, why don't we make it really inexpensive? And I bet you that that will help, people, younger people who would be able to afford it to sit there and probably would, and there's still great seats, just that people who wanted to sit in the orchestra who could afford, the center didn't want to be on the sides. So we did that, and it did start to change, the group that was coming. Then we have this program. We had a student rush program. I'm sure you're all familiar with those, that a lot of organizations have. And at some point, I think it was around 2017, we shifted it and changed it into a program we called 30 for 30 and under, 30 for 30. And I know some of you take advantage of that. We were just talking about that a little bit before. At first you had to come to the box office and buy tickets. Now, I think right around 2020, right before we shut down for COVID, we switched it so that people register online. So you can basically buy a ticket for $30 if you're 30 or under for almost every performance. We block out Nutcracker because that sells so incredibly well and a few other things, but basically any performance. And it started in COVID. I think we were around, right before we shut down, I think we were around like 2,000 or 3,000 members. And then once we opened back up again, it just started to grow exponentially. And we now have 31,000 members. Wow. Of this group, and they're buying a lot of tickets. And even though it's only $30, it's really starting to move the needle because there's so many people buying, and it's dramatically changing the audience. So our numbers have really gone down. I think, this isn't going to sound that impressive to all of you because you're so young, but we have now almost half of our audience is 50 or under, and about a third of it is 40 or under. And the 30s is, the 30 decade is one of the two biggest decades of our two levels of our audience. So it's really been exciting to see that happen. There's one other initiative that we did called Art Series, where we commission a contemporary artist to create a site-specific piece on the promenade in our theater, which is this very, very big, long space. And we choose the artists strategically based on really their following. So they have to be well-known and established in a certain way, but we're looking for artists that particularly appeal to a younger audience. And we take 3 performances during the winter season while this is up, and we sell them for, I forget what the number is now, but it's a low number. It's like 40-something, I think, $50, I can't remember, 52?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Something like that. For 3 performances where all the tickets in the house are that price. And we don't advertise, we don't sell that, we don't advertise that. We only market it to this young demographic that we have through these artists, and also over the years have built up ourselves. And those events have been amazing. We do a party on the promenade, and the dancers come after each of these 3 performances. We have about almost half of the people that come each time. They sell out usually. Almost half of the people that come each time are first-time attendees. And then any of you who've been involved in client acquisition know how hard it is to get someone to come again. And this has a really high return, about 29% of return visitors, which is huge for something like that. So that's also been a factor. We have a really active young patrons program too, with young patrons who are actually philanthropically participating and come to support events and things like that. So all these things together, there's some other things too that I feel like I've gone on way too long, but it's been exciting to see that happen and the audience really change. And some of it too is that some of our younger art, we do a lot of commissioning of new work, and some of the excuse me, the artists that have been commissioned have been working with artists outside of the dance world who are independent musicians, all kinds of designers, people that have all sorts of different kinds of following, and often younger people following them. So that's another that's another thing that's kind of been part of the dynamic too.
Incredible. Thank you. And I know, Diana, you were mentioning upstairs how a chairperson came to you and said, Diana, I don't want to go to my grandmother's ballet. I want to go to my generation's ballet. So I totally get that, but at the same time, sounds like still a large constituency is older. And I know my parents, who are approaching their 70s, are season ticket holders at Boston Ballet because they live around there. And every time they come back from a modern ballet, they're like, I don't like all this modern stuff. They're trying to appeal to the younger cohort, et cetera. So how do you kind of balance not alienating, a big chunk of your patrons while still appealing to a younger demographic?
So when I first started, it was about 4 years ago almost, I guess, as the chair. Hard to believe. I went and talked to every board member one-on-one, just because I didn't know most of them. I basically came to the ballet knowing nothing about the ballet. I went with my mother to Nutcracker and Firebird and that sort of thing, but I hadn't even been in the theater for decades at that point. And so my question was, well, doesn't anybody else want this job? Why me? And I talked to Kathy a lot about it and decided it would be really interesting to do, and it's a new thing. Would be a new thing for me. So I talked to all of the board members, and there was a wide disparity of opinion on what the ballet was. And I don't know anybody who knows a lot about the New York City Ballet, but we started. George Balanchine started it 75 years ago, and it's classic European ballet, but he was a real innovator. He did things that nobody had ever done before. He started the School for American Ballet, and he really brought ballet to this country, along with a couple of other people. And he was all about innovation, but it's a very classic style. So at the end of this survey, I decided, okay, we really need to get together in one room and discuss this and see, who are we as a ballet? Because that hadn't happened for a long time, actually, in probably about 5 years.
Yeah,
and a lot had changed between then and now. And we needed new audiences because our audience is basically dying off because they're old. And so we needed new stuff. And Balanchine was all about innovation, but in that particular style. So we did a retreat for a day, which was absolutely fascinating, and sort of went through, okay, what is New York City Ballet? What is our mission? Who are we? And what kind of legacy do we want to leave? And some people just wanted all traditional, other people wanted new. So how do you meld that? So we came up with principles on how we were going to operate, and part of it is we have an artistic director, and boards do not get involved in production questions and what's going to go on type questions in the art part of it. We raise money, we provide advice and help and support and that sort of thing, but we do not get involved in artistic decisions because that's not our job. That's the artistic director's job. We hire the artistic director and let them do their job, hands off. So it was more of a direction, and how much leeway did we think the artistic directors should have to do new stuff. And what we basically decided, the one criteria was, whatever it was, it had to be absolutely the best and excellent. So that left the artistic directors with a wide, they had a lot of leeway in what we would let them, well, not let them do, but what we would actually raise money for, let's just put it that way. And that's what we've done. And we've had some beautiful new pieces. We have several choreographers who are excellent, and we do new pieces all the time. Some of them work, some of them don't. But if we don't experiment, then who are we? We need to attract new audiences and that sort of thing. And actually, one thing that's really interesting is that Nutcracker every year is a big part of our ticket sales. So ticket sales are what part of our budget? 40, 50?
Yeah, about 45% of budget, yeah.
So 45% of the budget. So a large piece of that is Nutcracker.
Yeah, almost half, yeah.
Almost half is Nutcracker. So, which is pretty interesting. The rest of it is fundraising. So we're marketing on all sides here. We're marketing tickets to different audiences, and we're also marketing the ballet to philanthropists and foundations and things who want to give us money. So we have that market to look at. So we were talking to the artistic director after Swan Lake, and we were talking about, what the new season's going to be. And they're like, wow, so putting on story ballets like Nutcracker, that's what actually allows us to do these innovative things. That pays for it. He said, yes, that's why you have to do story ballets. So it's a mix. You have to do a mix. You have to understand who your audience is. It's like any other business. It's like a for-profit business too. You have customers, you have people who work there. You need to get people to buy your product, so you have to have something that people want to buy. Otherwise, they won't do it because there is a lot of other competition out there. So you're marketing, and our revenue is, basically, for simplicity, half philanthropy and half ticket sales. We very fortunately don't get any money at all from the federal government. Thank you very much. And so we need to market to those two constituencies if we're going to put on our performances. So it's a balancing act. Sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't, and we learn as we go along.
That's fascinating. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall at that retreat. It sounds like...
Oh, it was so much fun.
It sounds amazing.
It was really fun. And what people saw as the priorities, but I think it's really important that we came at the number one thing that we all agreed on was whatever we do, it has to be the best and excellent, because that's who we are.
Yeah, that's what New York City Ballet stands for. So it makes sense. And I'm curious if there's any other challenges that we haven't touched on that you see the ballet or New York City Ballet facing. I guess federal funding being pulled is not one of them, thank God, but anything else that is top of mind?
Kathy, you're better at this than I am, but one of the things is we're the only constituent, I think, that actually owns or has control over our building, so that's a big one. And how do you finance maintenance and repairs and things? And we have 3 unions, which Kathy has to deal with all the time, which is really interesting. I think one of the biggest challenges is, as Kathy said before, is who's your audience and what do they want to see? And how do you market that, and how do you market to your donors? And there's a lot of competition out there. There are a lot of different kinds of dance companies. There's a lot of different arts organizations. And for the most part, I think we all work really well together. I mean, Kathy's part of a group of, why don't you talk about some of the
one of the great things that came out of COVID actually is that there were, we were all of us in the same positions in different organizations around the city and around the country. We're really relying on each other and checking in, what are you doing, what do you, and that was super helpful during that time when everybody was trying to figure it out. And then what kept going after that were these groups of professional colleagues that were now talking together, and it's making collaborations and information sharing and all of that, so much easier. And actually, people ask me a lot, about our competition, with other dance companies and so forth. And the competition is something else. The competition is what's changed in our world, where you can now get great programming at home on your computer, your television, your phone, whatever. That's really the competition. And that was already happening. And then what it became even more so during COVID, when, of course, that's all people had, really, because nobody was going out and seeing anything. So I think part of coming back from that was sort of like trying to remind everyone and get people back in the habit of going to these public events. But that really is, I think, that is our competition going forward, too. I mean, that's, and also figuring out what's our role in this media world, and is there a role in this media world? We're not, it's very clear that most audience just doesn't really want to watch dance on television, like as if you're sitting watching a screen. But we've had a lot of success with other kinds of media content, like short form, behind the scenes, things like that, that we're really starting to invest in, more and more, that really are, I think, opportunities there, really. But yeah, and I think the other thing is money is always going to be the challenge with a nonprofit. You start over every year at the beginning of your fiscal year, raising all the money you have to raise again that year. I think with ticket sales, I think because of the competition and because of the way that people operate, it used to be that you would sell a subscription and you were kind of done. I mean, once you sold a person a subscription, they kept renewing it and they kept coming back and those tickets were sold. But now people don't appreciate a subscription as much because it doesn't really work with their lifestyle. They don't want to have that many things planned ahead and locked in. They want more flexibility. So we're all, working around that. But selling a single ticket versus selling a subscription is much more expensive, much more work, and you kind of have to start over each time. Just because you sold someone a ticket doesn't mean they're going to come back again. So it's a lot more work. So that's a big, that's just always a big challenge. And I think when things are a little in flux in our economy and in our world otherwise, people start to get anxious, and it affects, how they feel about philanthropy and all of those things. So I think that's just that's something that's just an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
And the other thing, actually, which a lot of people don't realize is, art sort of begets art. We work together. I mean, people look at NYC and ABT, and they think, just off the bat that we're in competition with each other. We're not. We need each other. ABT uses our theater. I mean, we rent them space in our theater every year. And we need each other. And it's sort of like, the old joke, one lawyer in town is not going to be successful. If you have 3 or 4, they're going to be wildly successful. It's the same with the arts. It's so important for a city, especially such as New York, to have an arts community, a vibrant arts community. And so we work together really well.
Yeah.
It's not a competition, usually.
Usually. Sometimes. But it's true, usually not.
And we're so lucky, too, to have Lincoln Center, with opera, ballet, and the New York Phil all there. It's such an amazing, I've never been to a city where it's all in that one square like that. It's
that's
amazing.
A really special thing that we have in the city, I think, is that, combination of all of those places under one, in one spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious because you mentioned like a new media world. And I know I do follow a lot of the dancers on Instagram, and I love watching their behind the scenes, like rehearsals, and their really interesting rehearsal outfits sometimes as well. But I was curious if that factors in at all to the financial equation. Like, are you looking for dancers that have a large following when you're making a decision about any of these things? No.
No. No, I mean, some of the dancers have, their own, they do have a large following, but that's kind of something that they do on their own. I mean, we have a very active social media team, of course, and mostly, we're doing, I mean, fortunately, that was already in place before COVID, which was very fortunate because, we were able to sort of pivot and just, focus on that. But yeah, the dancers, I mean, it's great when they have following because that's, for the most part, I mean, it's an excellent way to amplify what we're doing, usually. Yeah.
Sounds like there's a story there, but I won't ask.
Yeah. No, the way dancers come in to New York City Ballet, most of them come from the school, School for American Ballet. That's where most, because our artistic director is also the artistic director for the school. So it's all very, well coordinated and that sort of thing. We're 2 separate entities. We have 2 separate boards, but there is that interlock. And it's really important to both of us because most of the kids who go on in ballet come to us, and most of our new dancers come in. And so, our artistic directors can, watch the kids as they grow up and, sort of pinpoint who they want. So it's a great experience that way. We very occasionally bring in people from outside. But the technique, the SAB, was started by Ballantine, of course, so they teach the Ballantine technique. And there are not a huge number of other places in the world where that happens, where the dancers know the technique. And so it's not never, but it's fairly rare.
Yeah, it's rare. No, it's a really good point, because it's one of the things that distinguishes New York
Yep.
City Ballet from other companies, because most other ballet companies do audition for their dancers, from lots of different places, and we don't have auditions ever. So, if we ever bring anybody in from another company, it's somebody that the artistic team has spotted somewhere and thinks would fit. But as Diana says, you can't, you have to have spent a long time in that aesthetic, in the Balanchine aesthetic, to really kind of understand and be able to move like that. I mean, it's known for speed and certain kind of speed and musicality and athleticism.
Precision.
That is, it's unique. So you can't, even if you're the most amazingly, skilled, talented ballerina from another place, you can't just drop in to our company and make it work. So that's why it's important that the school, everybody comes up with the same training. They already know the rep from their training and all of that. So it's just unusual with the ballet company.
That's fascinating. I had no idea that the technique was so non-transferable that way. Really interesting.
Yeah.
In the few minutes we have left before opening it up to Q&A, just curious, both of you have had long, storied careers, and I'm sure have had a lot of stress at times. So just curious if you have any advice as it comes to work-life balance or how you tend to manage your work stress.
Yeah, well, I'm not great at work-life balance, I have to admit. So I'm probably the last person to be giving advice. But I think for me, I try to get exercise every day. I run in the park in the mornings. And morning is kind of like the only time I have control over, mostly I have control over my day. After that, it's kind of like up for grabs. So I try to do that regularly, and that really helps. I think the other thing that helps me is I'm really fortunate. I have great colleagues, and I have great board members, like this person sitting here. And there's so much moral support that's helpful to get, as you're going through all these challenges, and just to have other people that you can rely on and trust and talk to. I mean, that's really, I think for me, that's like number one, super important.
Yeah, for me, absolutely. I completely agree with Kathy. The early morning is my time. I don't do anything before 9, except I get up at 5:15 in the morning and I walk the dogs in the park for an hour. That's my time. I get to think. I talk to the dogs. They give very good advice, actually. And then I work out, and then I go into my office and I work for the rest of the day. And as Kathy says, you never know what's going to happen. You can have everything totally planned out, and then it completely changes because something blows up at some point. But mornings are a very, very important time.
I love that. Kathy, I read that your favorite running spot is Central Park, and I have to admit, I've tried to run in Central Park, and I find it actually more stressful because
so many people.
The tourists don't know how to get out of the way, and bikers and everything.
If you go early in the morning, there are not that many people there.
It's true, yeah, there's a different crowd
in the morning, but I understand that feeling, I really do, yeah.
Well, it's great that there's so many people in there.
True, yeah. Last question, I'm curious, what are your favorite ballets, if you had to pick one?
Okay, well, mine is one that was made, probably, 3 years ago? It's called Solitude. It's absolutely beautiful, and we are showing it this spring. Spring season opens on next Tuesday, a week from today. I highly recommend it. It's by a guy called Alexei Ratmansky, and he's an absolutely brilliant choreographer. He's Ukrainian, and it's about the Ukrainian war.
Wow.
It's so moving. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's a new ballet.
Great. I'll have to check that one out.
Very modern.
No, it's great. Yeah, it's hard to choose. Yeah. It's really hard to choose.
It's like being asked who's your favorite child.
We have almost 500 ballets in the rep, and so, but I think I lean towards, don't know how much you all know about the rep at the ballet, but it's much more, we have very few full lengths. It's not a typical repertoire, so we have some that are really nice, but most of the work is more abstract, non-narrative, and almost more like, it's kind of akin to looking at a piece of contemporary art. So a lot of the Balanchine works, he worked very closely with Stravinsky over the years, and they collaborated on a number of ballets. And over the years, he just became, he stripped down the ballets more and more, so you hardly see, there are a lot of them that have no sets and only leotards as costumes, and they're just fantastic, brilliant, masterpieces. So I guess, and there's a series of them that's kind of begun to be called his black and white ballets, because that's what they're wearing. They're wearing a black leotard and white tights, or vice versa. So I think I would lean towards those. And I would say of those, probably Agon is one that is probably on the top of the list. But I have to say, it's really hard to choose.
There's so much to see.
Yeah, out of 500, that sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much, and I'm sure lots of people have questions, so would love to open it up if anyone has a question in the audience as well. And I think we have mic runners too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I did ballet for 20 years, so it's really special to have you here. How have you found the sort of shift in maybe expectations of the dancers in terms of New York City Ballet as a workplace, as a creative outlet? What shifts have you seen?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I'd say big ones. Ballets really came out of a tradition of very much a one sort of autocratic leader, most of the time a male, very strict environment. The dancers were really not meant to speak much. They were supposed to do what they were told. It was just a very different dynamic. And I think over certainly the last decade, I think what's happened in our society in general, and just kind of the things that have taken place, have also penetrated the ballet world, and I think in a good way. Mostly, it's much more, to use an overused phrase, the dancers have much more agency. They're encouraged to speak up. There's a whole set of support system in place now for them, having to do with mental health, nutrition. I mean, these things were sort of there, but they weren't actually really promoted much in the past, and there's much more of that. There's just more, when the dancers come into the company from the school, they become professionals literally overnight, and they used to have to just like sink or swim. And now we have a mentorship program where some of the older dancers provide, advice, and they're just there to, the simplest thing, like when I come into class, where do I stand? Everybody has their, like in church, everybody has their place, So, and all kinds of things. So I think it's definitely a completely different environment. And also our artistic team is now a younger group. So they themselves have come out of that a bit, and have experienced that change, themselves. So that's, I think that's part of it too. The other side of it is that it can really open the Pandora's box. So there's a lot more, sort of to manage around that. But overall, it's a very, very good change, I think. And it's happening pretty much throughout the ballet world. It's just not just us. Everybody's trying to really modernize in that way.
Yeah. And I think actually you get a better product that way. So,
absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah. And the other thing that we talk about a lot as a board, one of the things that people don't understand really about ballet dancers sometimes is they work really, really hard as kids. And they're absolutely amazing athletes, but you can't do that to your body for more than like 20, 25 years. So most people are retired in their late 30s, early 40s, and they're young. Mm-hmm. And then what? So we've been spending a lot of time talking about and trying to develop, career training for dancers and to help them through that transition. Because, and you can imagine, your whole life has been ballet since you were 5 years old, and then all of a sudden you can't do it anymore. Then, you're just bereft, basically, unless you've sort of planned along for the future. And, some dancers are very good at that, and others not so much. So we try and help them through that transition and give them, coaching and the tools that they need to move on to the next part of their lives, which can be quite traumatic, actually. So, and it's interesting because you talk to like baseball players. I remember a friend of mine was going out with a baseball player a long time ago. He was in the minor leagues and was being looked at by a whole bunch of different teams. And I was talking to him about his career. He was like 20 something at that point. And I said, well, what happens if you don't make it? And he said, well, I can't think about that. I just cannot think about that. Everything I have has to be just getting through this. And I said, well, if you marry my friend, she's pretty expensive, so that's not going to work if you don't have a job. Anyway, not a good long-term plan.
Hello, thank you for being here. My question is about some of the fundraising. I'm curious to see if a lot of the fundraising you see for the ballet as a whole, or is it really focused on 4 specific projects? And I guess what the strategy is behind that.
That is a very, very good question, because as Kathy said before, fundraising, it's a very personal thing. So what we do is we have a very good development department, actually, who knows all of the board members and everybody who's interested in the ballet very well. So for instance, what you really want is general funds, if you can possibly get them. General funds are great, because then you can use them anywhere you want. However, also, you have things like, we just completed building a new whole PT, physical therapy section for the dancers, with cold plunge and saunas and masseuses and weights and all kinds of different equipment. And we pinpointed a couple of people who we thought would be really prime to give for something like that, and we were very successful in raising the money for that. So that's a very specific thing. Then we need general operating revenue, as we said, half the budget, which is salaries and everything, equipment and costumes and all the rest of it, has to come from philanthropy. So we've got to cover that. But then anything that we can raise around maintenance for the building or naming something, that takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
And money is fungible at the end of the day. If there's a project you want to do, somebody wants to give it for that, fine, that's great, because then you don't have to use our general funds to do it. So
no, it's exactly right. I mean, it's very, very donor specific. So there are some things that that we have, like a membership program where people just give a certain amount of money and they get a suite of benefits, and that's basically general operations. But those are people who really do enjoy those kinds of benefits. Then we have donors that are giving it a higher amount, and maybe they're interested in new work. So we go to them for new work or whatever it is. We also raise money through foundations, and they all have, each one of them has a very specific agenda of what they're trying to fund. The kinds of things we do a lot of special events, big galas, and so money comes in that way too, where you have an evening devoted to the ballet fundraising. That a lot of times it's particularly attractive for people who want to be entertaining someone or a company that wants to entertain clients. Then we have a very active corporate sponsorship area where we're working with different corporations to support different parts of our business, depending on what they're interested in. So it's kind of all over the map, and just sort of put it together. But that's another one of the really interesting things about fundraising for anybody who wants to go into fundraising.
Great, thank you. I think we have one in the back up there.
Thanks for coming out today. My question is, how much in terms of the global ballet community, how much do the different companies around the world engage with each other? So for example, do you have a line of communication with the Bolshoi?
At the moment, not with Bolshoi, but we do have, we pretty much know the rest of the, the people in the major ballet companies in the world, and we're pretty much in touch with a lot of them on a pretty regular basis. And as I was saying before, some of that comes out of the groups that sort of started to gather around COVID, but there was already that going on. And I think for some companies also, they're doing a lot more co-production these days because it's much more financially efficient. So they are going to be working with a company in London or something to create a piece together that they share and that they do at different times, but the costs are shared across, one or two companies. So that's also been something that's, really promoted a lot more communication, because that's just happening with the big ballets, especially. That's happening more and more.
And Bolshoi is out of Moscow, if anyone was not sure about that. Yeah. Yes, we have time for one more question. If there are any.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. I guess a little bit similar. How does New York City Ballet think about touring nationally and internationally, and like the opportunities that provides, also like different costs, different casts, so forth? How do you look at that as opportunities and selectively choose and partnership and so forth?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We're fortunate to have a really long season in New York, so we don't have a lot of time to tour, as opposed to a company like ABT, American Ballet Theater. They're on the road all the time because they don't really have a long season here in New York. So there are pluses and minuses to both, and I think the minus for us is that we're not seen around the world as much as some other companies are, because we can't, we don't travel. We usually we'll go, every 18 months or so somewhere in Europe, and we do a annual engagement at the Kennedy Center and at Saratoga Performing Arts Center. Saratoga water here we're drinking. Every so often somewhere in the US, but the problem is, in addition to the calendar, we're really expensive because we've got 100 dancers, and when we tour in the US, we're required to take our orchestra, which is another 62 people, and a lot of presenters just cannot afford that. So we've been taking a smaller group around a bit here and there to just, make sure that we get out into other communities. But it's something we would love to do more of. It's both a calendar and a financial, I guess in the opposite order: finance first, calendar second.
Well, speaking of calendar, I know that you have a flight to rush off to, but if you could please join me in thanking Diana Taylor and Kathy Brown for their time. We learned so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.